I documented my abusive stepmother for 2 years, then played the recordings at her precious family reunion. I never thought I'd be the one to destroy my family, but sometimes, the only way to save what's left of your soul is to burn everything to the ground and start over. For most of my childhood, it was just me and my dad. Mom died when I was 8, breast cancer that moved too fast for anyone to process. Dad and I muddled through those first few years together, two broken people trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. We weren't perfect, but we had each other, and somehow that was enough. Then Diane came along when I was 14. I still remember the first time Dad brought her home. She was everything my mother wasn't. Tall, blonde, immaculately dressed with a laugh that filled rooms. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a luxury SUV, and had this way of making everyone around her feel special. She brought me a journal that first night, leather, bound with my initials embossed on the cover. "Your dad tells me you like to write," she said, handing it to me with a conspiratorial smile. "I thought maybe you could write about our adventures together." I was suspicious, of course. What teenager isn't when a potential step-parent enters the picture? But Diane was good, really good, at making herself indispensable. She organized Dad's chaotic schedule, remembered my school events, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to make Dad laugh again. 6 months later, they were engaged. By my 15th birthday, she was my stepmother. The changes were subtle at first, so subtle that for years, I questioned whether I was imagining things. It started with comments about my appearance. "Honey, those jeans are doing you no favors," she'd say with a concerned smile. "We should go shopping this weekend. I know exactly what would flatter your body type." Or she'd run her fingers through my hair with a slight grimace. "Have you ever considered highlights? Your natural color is so mussy." Each criticism was wrapped in just enough concern that objecting made me seem ungrateful or overly sensitive. When I'd mention these comments to Dad, he'd shrug. "She's just trying to help Ellie. That's what mothers do." But my mother had never made me feel like I needed fixing. The first real incident happened when I was 16. I'd gotten an A on an AP history paper I'd worked on for weeks. I was proud of it. History wasn't my strongest subject, and I'd stayed up late for days researching. When I showed it to Dad, he high-fived me and stuck it on the fridge like I was 7 again. I didn't even care. I was just happy he was proud. Later that night, I overheard Diane talking to him in their bedroom. "Don't you think you're setting the bar a bit low?" Her voice was soft but clear through the thin walls. An A isn't exactly exceptional, especially if she wants to get into a decent college. My sister's kids are all straight A students. She worked really hard on that paper, D. Dad said, his voice already taking on that defensive but uncertain tone I'd come to recognize. "I'm sure she did, sweetheart. I just worry that if we celebrate mediocrity now, she'll never push herself to exile." Is that what Sarah would have wanted? The mention of my mother's name was like a slap. Dad went quiet after that. And the next morning, my paper was no longer on the fridge. When I asked about it, he mumbled something about not wanting to clutter up the kitchen. The pride in his eyes had dimmed. That was the first time I felt the ground shift beneath me. The first time I realized Diane wasn't just trying to be my mother. She was systematically erasing the one I'd had and reshaping our family in her image. By the time I was 17, Diane had perfected her technique. In public, she was the devoted stepmother who had taken on this poor motherless child. Her words to her friends when she thought I couldn't hear. She'd put her arm around me at family gatherings, tell stories about shopping trips and cooking lessons, and everyone would smile at how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful second mother. Behind closed doors, it was different. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My clothes were wrong, my friends were questionable, my interests were immature. She'd correct me constantly, my posture, my table manners, the way I spoke. "Ladies don't use those words, Ellie," she'd say when I swore. Or, "That's not how we behave in this family," when I disagreed with her. The worst part was how she'd turned Dad into her enforcer. He'd gone from my biggest champion to her echo chamber. "Listen to Diane, she knows what she's talking about," became his mantra. Or, "Don't be difficult, Ellie. Diane is just trying to help you." My little brother Jake came along when I was 18. I just started my senior year of high school, and suddenly, I wasn't just the disappointing stepdaughter. I was the practice run, the beta test for their real family. Jake was perfect in Diane's eyes. His baby clothes were meticulously coordinated. His development milestones were celebrated with professional photo shoots, and his every achievement, no matter how small, was documented and praised. Meanwhile, my college acceptance letters were met with, "Well, it's not Stanford, but I suppose it's a start." I tried to talk to Dad about how I was feeling once. We were alone in the garage. He was tinkering with his old Mustang. A hobby Diane tolerated but clearly found pointless. "Dad, do you ever feel like Diane treats me differently than Jake?" I asked, handing him a wrench. He sighed, not looking up from the engine. "She has high expectations, Ellie. That's not a bad thing." "It's more than that," I pressed. "Sometimes it feels like nothing I do is ever good enough for her. Like she's always looking for ways I fall short." Dad finally looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw recognition in his eyes. But then he shook his head. "You're being too sensitive. Diane loves you. She's harder on you because you're older and she wants you to succeed. That's what good parents do." "Mom never made me feel this way," I said quietly. His face hardened. "Your mother's not here, Ellie, and Diane has been nothing but generous, taking on another woman's child. Maybe you should show a little more gratitude." That was the moment I realized I'd lost him completely. In Diane's carefully constructed narrative, I was no longer the daughter he'd raised through grief and hardship. I was a burden he'd been saddled with, one that Diane had graciously agreed to bear. I left for college 3 months later, choosing a school 4 states away. Distance helped, but breaks and holidays were excruciating. Each time I came home, it felt less like my home and more like I was a visitor in Diane's showcase house, with my father and brother as her prized possessions and me as the inconvenient reminder of a past she couldn't quite erase. It was during my sophomore year of college that things escalated. Jake was 4 by then, precocious and adorable with Dad's dark hair and Diane's confident personality. I loved him fiercely, despite everything. He was innocent in all this, and the way his face lit up when I came home made the visits bearable. That Thanksgiving, I noticed bruises on Jake's arms. Small ones, the kind kids get from rough play. But when I asked him about them, his usual chatterbox personality shut down. "I'm not supposed to talk about it," he whispered, looking around nervously. "Talk about what, buddy?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Mommy says I'm clumsy, that I need to be more careful or people will think bad things." Before I could ask more, Diane swept into the room. "There you are, Jake. Grandma's asking for you." She shot me a look. "Ellie, could you help your father with the drinks? Unless college hasn't taught you how to make a simple cocktail yet." Later, I tried to bring up the bruises to Dad, but he brushed me off. "Kids get bruises, Ellie. You were covered in them at his age. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I heard Jake crying. I slipped into his room to find him sitting up in bed, clutching his dinosaur stuffed animal. "What's wrong, buddy?" I whispered, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I had an accident," he said, his voice small and scared. "I didn't mean to." I looked down and saw the wet spot on his sheets. "That's okay, Jake. Accidents happen. Let's get you cleaned up." As I helped him change into Dre pajamas, I noticed more bruises on his back and legs. These didn't look like typical play injuries. They were in places that suggested someone had grabbed him hard. "Jake, did someone hurt you?" I asked gently. He looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Mommy says I need to learn that big boys don't have accidents. She gets really mad." My blood ran cold. Before I could respond, the door opened and Diane stood there, her silhouette menacing in the dim light. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice honeyed but with an edge that made Jake shrink against me. "Jake had an accident? I was helping him change," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'll handle this," she said, moving into the room. "You can go back to bed." "Ellie, I've got it under control," I insisted. Her face hardened. I said, "I'll handle my son. Go to bed, Ellie." The emphasis on my son wasn't subtle. I looked at Jake, who was now staring at the floor, his little body tense with fear. Every instinct told me not to leave him, but I didn't know what to do. I was still trying to process what he told me, what I'd seen. "Good night, Jake," I said, giving his hand a squeeze. "Remember, accidents happen to everyone. It's okay." Diane's smile was glacial as she ushered me out. I stood in the hallway listening, my heart pounding. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her tone was low and threatening. Jake didn't cry out, but his silence was somehow worse. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I'd made a decision. I went to the electronics store as soon as it opened and bought a small voice recorder. It wasn't much, just a basic model that could record several hours of audio. I also bought a new journal, remembering the one Diane had given me years ago. "For our adventures," she'd said. Well, I was finally going to document our adventures together. That was the beginning of what I now call the documentation. For the next 2 years, I recorded everything I could when I was home. I hid the recorder in various places. The living room bookshelf, the kitchen junk drawer, once even taped under the dining table during a particularly tense family dinner. I kept meticulous notes in my journal, dating each entry and cross-referencing it with the recordings. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just knew I needed evidence, proof that I wasn't crazy, that the dynamic in our house wasn't normal or healthy. But as the recordings accumulated, patterns emerged. Diane was masterful at emotional manipulation. She'd praise Jake effusively in front of others, then berate him viciously in private for the smallest infractions. She'd make my father feel simultaneously special and inadequate, building him up as the man of the house, while subtly undermining his confidence in his parenting, his career decisions, even his memories of life with my mother. And me, I was her favorite target when I was home. Nothing was ever right. My career path was impractical. My boyfriend wasn't good enough. My clothes were inappropriate. But the real venom came out when she thought no one could hear. "Your daughter is becoming just like her mother," she told my father once, her voice dripping with disdain. All emotion, no ambition. Sarah was always playing the victim too, wasn't she? No wonder she couldn't fight hard enough to stay alive. My father's response was weak, a mumbled defense that died before it fully formed. I sat in my car that night, listening to the recording, and cried until I couldn't breathe. Not just for the cruel words about my mother, but for the father I'd lost. The man who once would have never allowed anyone to speak that way about the woman he'd loved, about his daughter. The worst recording came during spring break of my senior year. I'd set up the recorder in Jake's room, worried about what happened when I wasn't there. What I captured was Diane screaming at him for spilling juice on the carpet, calling him stupid, worthless, telling him he was just like your sister. Can't do anything right. Then there was a sound. Jake's cry and Diane's voice, suddenly sweet. "No, look what you made me do. If you tell Daddy about this, I'll tell him about all the bad things you've done, and he won't love you anymore. Is that what you want?" Jake's tiny, broken "No, Mommy," shattered something in me. This wasn't just emotional abuse anymore. And my father, where was he during all this? Working late as usual, leaving his children in the care of a monster he refused to see. I took the recordings to a therapist at school, not sure what to do. She confirmed what I already knew. This was abuse, and Jake was in danger. She urged me to contact Child Protective Services, but I hesitated. I'd heard horror stories about the system, about families torn apart, children placed in situations worse than the ones they'd left. And part of me still hoped I could reach my father, make him see what was happening. I graduated that May and moved back home temporarily while I looked for a job. Living there full-time again was hellish, but I couldn't leave Jake. I kept recording, kept documenting. Diane seemed to sense my vigilance and was more careful around me, but she couldn't maintain the facade 24/7. The mask slipped off enough that my collection of evidence grew. I tried to talk to my father again, this time more directly. "Dad, I need you to listen to something," I said one evening when Diane was at her book club. I had my phone ready with one of the recordings, one where she was berating Jake for being stupid and slow, because he couldn't tie his shoes fast enough. Dad looked uncomfortable. "Ellie, if this is more complaints about Diane, just listen." I interrupted, pressing play. He listened for about 30 seconds before his face darkened. He reached over and stopped the recording. "You're recording conversations in our house, without permission. Do you know that's illegal in this state?" I stared at him, incredulous. "That's your takeaway, not the fact that your wife is emotionally abusing your son. Diane has high standards, yes. She can be harsh sometimes, but she loves Jake and wants the best for him." He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older. "Parenting isn't easy, Ellie. You don't understand? I understand that what she's doing is wrong," I insisted. "And it's not just Jake. Have you heard how she talks about Mom? About me? Your mother has been gone for 15 years, he said quietly. "Diane is my wife now and Jakey's mother. I know it's been hard for you to accept that, but this." He gestured at my phone. "This is crossing a line. She's hurting Jake," I said, my voice breaking. "And you're letting her." He stood up, his expression closed off. "I want those recordings deleted. All of them. This conversation is over." I didn't delete anything. Instead, I made copies, stored them in multiple places. Cloud drives, a friend's computer, a USB drive I kept with me at all times. I knew then that my father wasn't going to help me. He'd chosen his narrative, the perfect second family, the successful wife, the adorable son. Acknowledging the truth would mean admitting he'd failed to protect his children, that he'd been manipulated and weak. And my father, for all his good qualities, had never been good at admitting failure. The breaking point came at the annual family reunion that summer. Diane's extended family hosted it every year at her parents' lake house. A massive gathering of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. It was always a performance for Diane, a chance to showcase her perfect family and receive the adoration she craved. This year was special because her parents were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. There would be speeches, a renewal of vows, and a professional photographer to document everything. Diane had been planning for months, coordinating matching outfits for the four of us, rehearsing Jake on how to behave, reminding me repeatedly not to cause a scene, or dress inappropriately. The night before the reunion, I overheard her talking to Jake in his room. I pressed record on my phone and stood quietly outside the door. "Remember what we practiced?" she was saying, her voice tight. "When Grandma asks if you like school, what do you say?" "I love school. My teacher says I'm the smartest in the class," Jake recited, his voice flat. "And if anyone asks about the bruise on your arm, I fell off the swing at the park." "Good boy. And what happens if you mess up tomorrow?" A pause, then Jake's small voice. "No iPad for a month. Add the closet." My blood ran cold. The closet. I pressed closer to the door. "That's right," Diane said. "Now, let's practice your smile again." I'd heard enough. I pushed open the door to find Jake sitting rigidly on his bed, Diane standing over him. They both looked up, startled. "What's the closet, Diane?" I asked, my phone still recording in my hand. Her face transformed instantly, the hardness melting into concern. "Oh, it's just a little game Jake and I play, isn't it, sweetheart?" She stroked his hair, but I could see her fingers digging into his scalp. Jake nodded, his eyes downcast. "Jake, why don't you go brush your teeth?" I suggested, not taking my eyes off Diane. "I need to talk to your mom." Jake looked between us, uncertain, but Diane nodded tightly and he scurried out. As soon as he was gone, her mask dropped. "Eavesdropping now. Your father will be interested to hear about this latest invasion of privacy." "What's the closet?" I repeated. She smiled, cold and confident. "You know, Ellie, I've tried so hard with you. For years I've tolerated your attitude, your ingratitude, your constant attempts to undermine me with your father. But you're an adult now. If you can't be a positive part of this family, perhaps it's time for you to move on. Done. Answer the question, Diane. What do you do to my brother in the closet?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think anyone will believe you over me? Your father certainly won't. I'm the one who rebuilt him after your mother left him broken. I'm the one who gave him a real family, a son to be proud of. You're just a reminder of his failure, neurotic, jealous girl who never got over her mommy issues." I felt a calm settle over me then, a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. "You're right about one thing," I said. "It is time for me to move on. But I'm taking Jake with me." She laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "You can't take what isn't yours." "Jake is my son. He's my brother," I countered. "And I have 2 years of recordings that prove you're abusing him. And Dad, and me." The color drained from her face. "You're bluffing." I held up my phone. "Want to listen to what I just recorded? Or maybe the time you told Jake he was worthless. Or when you slapped him for spilling juice. Or maybe my personal favorite, when you told Dad that Mom didn't fight hard enough to stay alive." For the first time since I'd known her, Deanne looked uncertain. "Those recordings won't hold up. Your father will never believe you." Maybe not," I conceded. "But your parents might, your friends, your boss, the police, CPS. How do you think your perfect image will hold up under that kind of scrutiny?" She recovered quickly, her confidence returning. "You're making a mistake, Ellie, a big one. If you try to come between me and my family, I will destroy you." I smiled then, a real smile that felt foreign on my face. "You've been trying to destroy me for 8 years, Diane. I'm still here." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I knew what I had to do. The next day, we all drove to the lake house in tense silence. Dad kept shooting worried glances between Diane and me, clearly sensing the tension but unwilling to address it. Jake sat in his booster seat, unnaturally quiet and still in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. I wore the sundress Diane had suggested, not wanting to give her any ammunition before I made my move. The reunion was exactly as expected, a carefully orchestrated display of family perfection. Diane's parents, wealthy and imposing, presided over everything like benevolent dictators. Her father had been a judge, her mother a surgeon, achievements Diane never let anyone forget. They doted on Jake, barely acknowledged me, and treated my father with the polite condescension they'd always shown him. The celebration was in full swing by mid-afternoon. Diane's father was setting up for his anniversary speech, a projector ready to display a slideshow of family photos. Diane was at the center of it all, laughing and charming, occasionally shooting me warning glances when I got too close to Jake. I waited until everyone was gathered for the speech. Diane's father was just beginning to talk about family legacy and values passed down through generations when I approached the laptop connected to the projector. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Before we continue, I have something I'd like to add to the presentation. Something about family values." Diane was across the room, her face a mask of fury as she realized what I was about to do. She started moving toward me, but it was too late. I'd already plugged in my USB drive. "This is what family values look like in our house," I said and pressed play. The first recording filled the room. Diane screaming at Jake, calling him worthless. Then another, her mocking my dead mother to my father. Another, the sound of a slap, Jake's cry, Diane's threat about the closet. The room went completely silent except for the recordings. Diane's mother had her hand over her mouth. Her father stood frozen, the microphone dangling from his fingers. My father was staring at the screen, his face ashen. Diane finally reached me and tried to grab the laptop. "She's edited these," she shouted, her composure completely gone. "She's lying. Tell them, Robert, tell them she's lying." My father didn't say anything. He was looking at Jake, who had pressed himself against the wall, tears streaming down his face. I kept playing the recordings. Months and years of documented abuse, laid bare for everyone to hear. When I finally stopped, the silence was deafening. "This is what's been happening in our home," I said quietly. "This is who Diane really is, and I'm not going to be silent anymore." What followed was chaos. Diane's parents pulled her aside, their faces thunderous. Family friends gathered their children and left quickly, murmuring about private matters. My father sat down heavily in a chair, looking lost. I went to Jake and knelt in front of him. "It's gonna be okay now, I promise. No one is gonna hurt you anymore." He threw his arms around my neck and held on tight. "The closet is scary," he whispered. "She locks me in when I'm bad." I closed my eyes, holding him closer. "You're not bad, Jake. You've never been bad." The aftermath was messy, as these things always are. Diane's father, the former judge, tried to contain the situation, talking about family counseling and private matters. But her mother, to my surprise, was the one who took action. She took me aside while Diane was still ranting and denying everything. "I always knew something wasn't right," she said quietly. The way Jake flinched when she moved too quickly. "The way your father deferred to her on everything." She looked at me with tired eyes. "My daughter has issues. Issues we should have addressed long ago. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." Child Protective Services became involved. The recordings, while legally questionable since they were made without consent, opened an investigation that revealed even more than I'd documented. The closet was a small linen closet in the hallway where Diane would lock Jake for hours when he misbehaved. There were other punishments too, ones Jake revealed in his interviews with social workers. My father finally woke up to the reality of our family. The divorce was quick, with Diane fighting viciously for custody of Jakey. Not because she loved him, I believe, but because losing him meant losing her perfect image. She lost anyway. The evidence was too overwhelming. Dad and Jake moved in with me temporarily while Dad found a new place. We're all in therapy now, individual and family sessions. Dad apologizes almost daily, his eyes haunted by the realization of what he allowed to happen. I've forgiven him, mostly, understanding that he too was a victim of Diane's manipulation. But some trust has been broken that will take years to rebuild. Jake is doing better. Kids are resilient, the therapist says, especially when removed from toxic environments. He still has nightmares about the closet, still apologizes excessively for small mistakes. But he laughs more now, plays more freely. He's learning that spilling juice doesn't make him worthless, that accidents happen, that love shouldn't come with conditions. As for Diane, I hear she's moved to another state, started over with a new job, and presumably, a new narrative about her ungrateful stepdaughter, and the family that turned against her. Sometimes I worry about the next family she might infiltrate, the next child who might suffer under her care. But I can't save everyone. I did what I could to save Jake, to save what was left of my family. I never wanted to be the one to destroy my family. But sometimes, destruction is necessary for rebirth. From the ashes of what Diane built, we're creating something new, something imperfect and messy and real. A family built on truth instead of image, on genuine love instead of control. And that journal Diane gave me all those years ago, I still have it. I filled it with new entries, not documentation of abuse, but records of healing. Jake's first genuine belly laugh after the divorce. Dad cooking dinner for us, badly but with so much love. The day Jake called me his hero. These are the adventures worth recording. These are the stories that will define us now.